Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and the case that defied Poirot, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The letter Poirot was never meant to read. A cryptic message arrives, but was it meant for him or meant to mislead? The fire cracked once, loud and sudden, like a pistol shot in the dead of night. Poirot's eyes lifted slowly from the chessboard. He had been deep in thought, considering the endgame. The silence that followed was thick, too thick. Then came the knock, a single rap. Not timid, not rushed, but deliberate, as if someone on the other side of that door knew that what they carried was dangerous. "Enter," he said, not rising. The door creaked open to reveal Georges, his ever-faithful valet, standing stiffly, holding a single envelope between gloved fingers. "A letter, monsieur," he said, hesitating. Poirot did not take it at once. He studied it from afar. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, no return address. But it was the seal that caught his eye. A wax stamp, deep crimson, with an unfamiliar crest. Two owls entwined, their eyes hollow. He stood now, slowly. "Merci, Georges," Poirot murmured, his eyes still on the envelope as though it were a venomous snake. "Leave me." When Georges retreated, Poirot took the letter, weighing it in his hand like a judge might a verdict. Then he sliced it open with a silver blade. Inside, just one page, typed with an old Remington, he could tell by the uneven ink blots. "To the great Hercule Poirot, they say you are a genius. Prove it. A death will occur at Ravenstone Manor, but nothing is what it seems. Come alone, or not at all. No signature, no date, nothing else. Only that mocking, cruel challenge." "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed, "so it begins." He stood still for a long moment, the note trembling slightly in his grip. Poirot did not believe in coincidences, and he did not believe in games. But someone did. Someone was toying with him. That night, the rain began. It fell in sheets against the windows of the train as it wound its way through the moors. The English countryside was nothing but shadow and fog, blurring the edges of hills and trees. Poirot sat alone in the first-class compartment, his suitcase carefully arranged beside him, his mind in motion. "Why me?" he asked the window, though the reflection did not answer. He knew Ravenstone Manor only by reputation, a sprawling estate on the cliffs of Dover, owned by one Lady Evelyn Hargrave, a widow of particular social charm and private sorrows. Her late husband, Charles Hargrave, had died under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago, drowned in the sea below. A tragedy, the papers had called it. But Poirot knew better. He remembered the whispers, the insinuations. "Human nature, Hastings," he murmured to himself. "It never changes. The dead leave shadows, and the living leave lies." Ravenstone itself emerged from the mist like something conjured from Gothic myth. 4 stories tall, ivy crawling up its stone flanks, with turrets like broken teeth, and windows that stared like dead eyes. The wind howled as he stepped from the car. A servant, a pale, anxious man named Edgar, greeted him at the great iron door. Welcome, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Hargrave is expecting you. He was ushered into the grand foyer, where time itself seemed suspended. Candlelight flickered in sconces. The grandfather clock in the hall let out a sonorous chime. Midnight. The guests had already arrived. Poirot observed them from the staircase landing. A dinner party was underway, 8 in total. Each face turned toward him, half in curiosity, half in something else, something darker. Lady Evelyn, tall and elegant, in a velvet dress of forest green, was the first to rise. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, with a thin smile, "I trust your journey wasn't too unpleasant." "Ah, madame," he replied, bowing slightly. "The countryside was most atmospheric. It has prepared me, I think, for whatever lies ahead." The room gave a small ripple of polite laughter, but the eyes that met his were calculating. To his left, there was Dr. Felix Mercer, an aging psychiatrist with round glasses and a handshake too firm, his smile practiced and cold. "I read your profile in the Times, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "I wonder, do you always accept anonymous invitations to dinner?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Only when they threaten murder, Doctor." Next was Celeste Vane, a glamorous actress with a voice like velvet and eyes that danced too quickly away from his. "Oh, I do love a mystery," she purred, sipping her wine. Then Colonel Bainbridge, retired, upright, his eyes hard with suspicion. "This whole affair reeks of manipulation," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain. Beside him, Lady Hargrave's nephew, Vincent, young and sharp, a flash of anger behind a veneer of charm. "Can't imagine why anyone would drag you into this," he said. "No offense," Poirot smiled. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, it is precisely when one cannot imagine a reason that a reason exists." He also took note of the maid, Alice, quiet, observant, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she poured wine, and Mr. Dorian Selwyn, the family lawyer, sleek, mild-mannered, with the kind of eyes that avoided mirrors. Poirot dined. He listened. He watched. Later, he walked alone through the corridors of Ravenstone. The wind moaned through the halls. The candles flickered unnaturally, as if threatened by breath. As he turned the corner near the old library, he stopped. A door. A single line of light beneath it, and the sound, barely audible, of weeping. Poirot approached, but the weeping stopped. He knocked. No answer. Inside, nothing but silence, and a faint perfume in the air. Lilac. Familiar. On the desk, papers, neatly arranged, and a torn envelope. Poirot froze. It bore the same wax seal as his own. But this letter, it was addressed to Lady Hargrave, and it had been opened a week ago. His heart quickened. She had received the same threat, but she had not warned anyone, not even the police. "Ah," he whispered, "so she plays her own game." He heard the click, a soft sound, behind him. He turned, but the corridor was empty. By dawn, the body had been found. It was Vincent, dead at the foot of the cliff, just as Charles Hargrave had been, 5 years before. Broken neck, no struggle, no witnesses. Suicide, the house whispered. But Poirot, kneeling by the body, saw the truth in a single detail. The mud on Vincent's shoes did not match the damp soil at the edge. Someone had moved him. Back inside, panic reigned. Lady Hargrave sobbed in her chamber, refusing to speak. The others offered theories, alibis. But Poirot saw something deeper. Guilt, dancing behind their eyes like flames. Someone, he thought, knew he would die. Someone watched, and someone had lied about the letter. He gathered them in the drawing room. "I must ask," Poirot said calmly, "if anyone else received a letter such as mine, a letter warning of death." Silence. "No?" He paused. "Then permit me to ask this. Why was such a letter, already opened, found in the Lady Hargrave's study?" All eyes turned. The room crackled with tension. Lady Hargrave stood, her hands shaking. Yes, I received it. I didn't believe it was real. I didn't want to frighten the guests." Poirot stepped closer. "Or you did not want them to know the truth, that someone among them knew your secrets." She flinched. Poirot watched everyone else. Dr. Mercer looked down. The actress, Celeste, gripped her glass too tightly. Bainbridge muttered something under his breath. And then, in the quiet, came Alice's voice. "It wasn't the first letter." They turned to her. She looked pale, scared, but resolute. "What do you mean?" Poirot asked softly. Alice swallowed. "Lady Hargrave's husband. He got one too, 5 years ago, the night he died." Poirot felt the blood freeze in his veins. 2 deaths, 2 letters, 1 pattern, and the sender, still unknown. But Poirot now knew 2 things. The murderer was in that house. And they had been playing this game far longer than he had suspected. As the storm outside rose, Poirot sat alone by the fire once more. The letter lay on the table before him, open, mocking. He stared at it, his reflection in the glass of the window beyond barely visible. "Very well," he said aloud, "let us play." And from the shadows of the hall, someone listened. Someone smiled. The game had begun. Chapter 2. A murder without a motive. No enemies, no struggle, no reason. And yet, someone wanted them dead. The scream cut through the morning fog like a blade, high and sharp and full of something that words could not hold. Pure, unfiltered terror. Poirot was already dressed when it came, already stepping into the corridor of Ravenstone Manor with deliberate urgency, his polished shoes clicking against the cold stone floor. The scream had come from the east wing, near the guest quarters. It was Alice, the maid, her voice cracking, her hand pressed to her mouth as she stood frozen by the open door to Vincent Hargrave's room. Poirot reached her in seconds. She backed away, pointing a trembling hand. Inside, the smell of damp cologne and something metallic lingered. Vincent lay on the floor beside his bed, crumpled, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were wide, but it was the expression on his face that disturbed Poirot the most. Not fear, not pain, confusion, as though he had not understood, even in the final moment, why he was dying. Poirot crouched beside the body. There was no blood, no sign of struggle. The dressing gown Vincent wore was unwrinkled. His watch still ticked faintly on his wrist. No marks on the hands or neck. The room was in perfect order, and yet he was dead. Poirot leaned in. There, on the corner of Vincent's lips, a thin smear of something. Not blood. He took a handkerchief, dabbed it. Faintly sweet, faintly bitter. Almond. Poison, he murmured. But why? So clean, so cruel. He stood slowly as the others began to gather. Evelyn, pale and stricken. Colonel Bainbridge, fists clenched. Celeste, eyes red as if from tears, though Poirot had not heard her cry. Dr. Mercer entered last, already reaching for the pulse, already beginning his performance. Dead. Instant, perhaps. Neck broken in the fall, Mercer said, adjusting his spectacles. Or a seizure. Difficult to say without a proper autopsy. Poirot watched him, with narrowed eyes. "Ah, but that is not correct, Doctor. The body fell, yes, but it did not seize. It was placed. Look, no bruises on the hands, no clenched fists. This was not a death by natural cause. This was not an accident. This, he gestured delicately, was murder. Gasps followed, predictably. Poirot did not turn toward them. His attention remained fixed on the floor, on a thin line of something dark on the edge of the rug. He knelt again and peeled it back gently. A drop, a single one. Ink, not blood. And yet, beneath the bed, a page, torn from a notebook, its edges frayed. It read only, "She knows." Poirot's mind ignited. He stood again, turning to the group with a strange calm. "Forgive me, mes amis, but this is not the first death in this house, and it shall not be the last if the truth remains hidden." Lady Hargrave swayed. Colonel Bainbridge stepped forward to steady her, but Poirot noted the stiffness in his movement, something controlled, like a man at war with his instincts. Celeste stepped back, pressing a hand to her throat. "He was troubled," she whispered. "Vincent, he was always afraid of something. Someone." "Of whom, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked softly. "Surely he confided in you." She hesitated. "He didn't say." "But he hinted." She bit her lip. "Only once. He said, 'There's something wrong here. Something that never died.'" Poirot nodded slightly. "Indeed. Ghosts of the past. They are always with us. But some ghosts, they kill." Later, in his temporary study, Poirot examined the letter again. The same wax seal, the same cruel tone. It was no longer a warning. It had become a prophecy. And like all prophecies, it demanded sacrifice. Someone had chosen Vincent. But why? He had no enemies, no fortune, no lovers, at least not publicly known. And yet, he had died. Poirot reviewed his notes meticulously. The maid Alice had said Vincent argued with someone 2 nights ago. She heard voices, but could not identify them. Lady Hargrave denied it. Of course. Said he had been perfectly cheerful. A lie. Poirot could see it in the tightness of her eyes, the tremble in her teacup. In the drawing-room, he resumed his inquiries. "Colonel Bainbridge," Poirot began, "your relationship to the Hargrave family, is it one of duty or sentiment?" The colonel frowned. "Both. Charles Hargrave was a friend. I've served Lady Hargrave since his passing, protecting her interests." Poirot tilted his head. "Including her secrets?" The colonel stiffened. "I don't follow you do," Poirot said quietly, "but perhaps you wish I did not." He turned next to Dr. Mercer. "You were Vincent's confidant, no?" "Only in the most casual sense," Mercer replied. "We spoke from time to time. He drank too much occasionally, but nothing significant." Poirot folded his arms. "You are a man of science, Doctor. And yet, when you checked the body this morning, you declared him dead by fall, before checking his pupils, before noting the smell." Mercer's brow furrowed. "I assumed—" "Non," Poirot interrupted gently. "You knew, or you feared. Either way, your lie is telling." He watched Mercer, sweat under the fireplace glow, but the breakthrough came later that night. Poirot stood alone by the fireplace, his gaze fixed on the portrait above the mantelpiece. Charles Hargrave, the man who'd fallen from the same cliffs 5 years before. The expression was too familiar, the same hollow surprise as Vincent's. Then he saw it. The painting, its frame slightly loose at the corner. He reached up, adjusted it, and something clicked. A compartment opened. Inside, another note. Handwritten this time. Faded. She found out. I have no choice. If I fall, let it be known I did not jump. Poirot stared at the words in silence, then turned back to the group now assembled at his request. I know the killer, he said. Lady Hargrave rose, her face ghostly pale. No, no, it cannot be. Poirot's voice was soft. Madame, you loved your husband, but you also discovered he was not faithful. Her lips parted, her eyes widened. Who told you? No one, Poirot said. But the perfume, the lilac, it lingered in a study where only a man once dwelled. And then there is the matter of the letters. You kept them. Why? Sentiment? Number leverage. The group was frozen. Poirot stepped toward Celeste. You, mademoiselle, were once the companion of Charles Hargrave. Quietly, hidden, until he left you. And you returned here, years later, with revenge carefully hidden beneath your charm. Celeste shook her head violently. You're mad. No, I am thorough. The ink beneath Vincent's bed, it matches the pen in your dressing table. Celeste's eyes narrowed. So, what if I wrote the note? Poirot's gaze was hard now. Because Vincent discovered what happened to his uncle. He learned that Charles did not fall. He was pushed. And you, mademoiselle, feared exposure. Colonel Bainbridge stepped forward. You have no proof. But Poirot turned. No, you have no proof. But I have motive, means, and the psychology. You, Colonel, were also involved. Not in the murder, but in the cover-up. You loved Lady Hargrave. You buried her secret. Gasps again. Evelyn trembled. Celeste took a step forward, her voice steel. None of this will stand in court. Poirot smiled coldly. But you misunderstand. I do not serve the court. I serve the truth. She lunged. Bainbridge caught her. The others stepped back. Alice, in the corner, wept quietly. Poirot walked away from the chaos. The storm now, pounding the windows like fists from beyond. He stood before the window, watching the sea churn. Murder without motive, number. The motive was always there. Love, betrayal, obsession. But it was hidden, behind masks and manners. As all evil things are. Poirot closed his eyes. In the end, he whispered, it is never the method, but the motive that reveals the murderer. And with that, the manor fell into silence once more. But Poirot knew the case was not yet done. Something darker still lingered at Ravenstone, and the next death would be personal. Chapter 3. The alibi that changed everything. One statement turns the entire case upside down. Who's protecting who? I saw him alive after the time he was meant to be dead. The words fell into the drawing room like a dagger into silk. All conversation ceased. The fire crackled once, as though reacting in kind. Hercule Poirot turned slowly, his gaze narrowing on the speaker. Alice, the maid, standing with her apron twisted nervously between her fingers. Her eyes darted, fearful, but what she had said could not be unsaid. In a case ruled by silence, this single sentence had the power to collapse every deduction made thus far, and perhaps it was meant to. Repeat that, if you please, Poirot said, voice calm but sharpened like a scalpel. Alice swallowed, then nodded. Yes, monsieur. I was on the second floor. Just before sunrise. I went to bring a tea tray to the colonel's room, but I saw Vincent Hargrave in the corridor, walking, alive. Colonel Bainbridge leaned forward in his chair, incredulous. That's impossible. The boy was dead by then. Poirot raised a hand, silencing further protest. He studied Alice as if she were a puzzle herself. Mademoiselle, you are certain of the time? I am, monsieur. I remember because I passed the grandfather clock. It struck 4. 4 o'clock. That was nearly an hour after the estimated time of death. The body had been discovered around 6. Rigor mortis had begun, but only faintly. Could Vincent have died later than everyone believed? If so, the timeline was undone, the suspects repositioned, motives realigned, and worst of all, a carefully crafted lie had been allowed to stand. Poirot turned away, masking the fire now beginning to burn behind his eyes. Ah, he thought, human nature, always weaving shadows when truth threatens to expose the light. There was too much precision in Alice's statement, too much fear. Not staged, but perhaps coached. He returned to her again. Tell me, mademoiselle, what exactly did you see? Not just that you saw him, but what was his manner, his direction? Was he in haste or calm? He looked confused, she said slowly. Not like himself. He was still in his dressing gown. And he wasn't heading to his room. He was going toward the study. Poirot nodded slowly. And you told no one until now. Why? Alice hesitated. Because I was told not to. The room chilled. Poirot moved forward, very slightly. By whom? Alice's lips parted, but her eyes flickered. Poirot saw it. She would not say. Not yet. But now, there was something new in the game. Someone had convinced a witness to hide the truth, and that someone had either killed Vincent Hargrave or was protecting the one who had. He dismissed the gathering quietly, but not before taking careful stock of every reaction. Lady Hargrave looked stunned, but there was something behind her silence. Not grief, not shock, guilt perhaps. Bainbridge avoided Alice's eyes, and Dr. Mercer. He stood too still. Poirot had seen this before, in liars trying to appear calm. The storm outside had not relented. Thunder grumbled like a beast in its den. Poirot retreated to the library, where the scent of aged leather and ash wrapped around him. He seated himself before the fire, steepling his fingers. The alibi had changed everything. If Vincent had still been alive at 4 a.m., then the timeline crumbled. The only person unaccounted for during that hour was Dr. Mercer, who had claimed to have been asleep in his guest room. No one could confirm that, and Mercer had been too eager to pronounce death, too fast to assume a cause. And now Poirot remembered something else, an oddity, the fireplace in Mercer's room. Unlit, though every other room bore signs of heat from the cold night. No ashes, no logs, no use. Why then had Mercer requested the fire be prepared by Alice before bed? A red herring, perhaps, but it tugged at Poirot's logic like a loose thread. Later that evening, Poirot sought out Celeste Vane, who had sequestered herself in the music room, playing a haunting melody on the piano, low and melancholic. The notes echoed through the manor like whispers from the dead. "You play with emotion, mademoiselle," Poirot said as he entered. She did not turn. "I was fond of Vincent, whatever you may think." Poirot nodded. "Then you will forgive the question. Where were you between the hours of 3 and 5? She stopped playing. "I was awake, in my room. I couldn't sleep." "Did anyone see you?" "No." She finally turned, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "But I didn't kill him." Poirot approached slowly. "You are an actress, mademoiselle, and with that comes a rare talent. To be someone else entirely." Her lips twisted. "You think I'm pretending now?" "I think," he said gently, "you are hiding something more painful than guilt." Her expression flickered. Poirot waited. "He told me he was going to confront someone," she said at last. "That night. He didn't say who, but he was afraid." Poirot leaned in. Afraid of what? Of what he might learn. That night, Poirot examined the study. Nothing had changed on the surface, but one drawer in the desk caught his eye, locked. He retrieved his tools, his mind as sharp as the pick he used to unlock it. Inside, letters, old, yellowed, correspondence between Charles Hargrave and Dr. Mercer. Discussions of mental decline, of memory loss, of erratic behavior. Charles had written, "If Evelyn ever finds out, she'll think I'm mad. Mercer says I'm safe, but I don't trust him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Why had Mercer kept these letters? For leverage? For protection? He took them and folded them into his coat. The next day, Poirot invited Mercer to walk the grounds. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with moisture. Fog clung to the hedges like cobwebs. "Doctor," Poirot said casually, "you knew Charles Hargrave well." Mercer nodded. "I did. He was troubled." "And Vincent, did he ever ask about his uncle's condition?" Mercer hesitated. "Once. I told him what I told everyone. It was a tragedy, nothing more. Even though the man doubted your integrity, wrote of it in letters." Mercer stopped. "What are you implying?" "That perhaps the reason you were so quick to declare Vincent's death an accident was because you feared what an autopsy might reveal. I am a man of medicine. You are a man of secrets." Poirot interrupted softly. "And the difference, Doctor, is that one seeks to heal, the other to deceive." Mercer's jaw twitched. "I had nothing to do with Vincent's death." "No?" Poirot turned. "Then why did you tell Alice to lie?" Silence. Poirot knew then. But it was not Mercer who struck the blow. It was not Mercer who killed. He had merely shielded the one who had. Back inside, Poirot stood before them all. "The truth," he said, "does not require permission. It simply waits." He paced. Vincent Hargrave discovered something. A letter. A piece of evidence. Perhaps in the study. He confronted someone. At 4 o'clock. He died shortly thereafter. He turned to Lady Hargrave. "You feared scandal. You feared madness. You feared the past. But it was not you who killed." Then he faced Bainbridge. "You loved her. Enough to protect her. Enough to keep secrets. But you did not kill Vincent." He stepped to Celeste. "You misled us. But your motive was not murder." Then, to Mercer. "You lied, but out of fear." Poirot now turned to Alice. She stood there, trembling. Poirot walked to her, gently taking her hand. "You saw him?" "Yes, but not at 4. She froze. "You were told to say that, to create doubt. But the truth is, you saw someone who looked like Vincent. A silhouette, a robe, but not the man." Poirot turned slowly, eyes falling on the final figure. Evelyn Hargrave. She had gone utterly still. "You thought he would ruin everything," Poirot said softly. "He found the letters. He learned what Charles had written. That you knew the truth all along. That your husband's madness wasn't madness at all. It was guilt, and he was going to expose you." Her voice, when it came, was flat. "You don't understand. You never do." Poirot waited. She rose. "My husband was a monster. He ruined lives. He destroyed people. And Vincent, he idolized him. He wouldn't listen." "You killed to preserve a lie," Poirot whispered. "I killed," she said, "to bury a past that should never have surfaced." Poirot bowed his head. "And so the alibi was not to protect you, but to buy you time." Evelyn looked at him. "Do what you must." Poirot said nothing. Later, as she was taken away, the manor stood silent once more. Poirot lingered by the window, watching the fog return to the cliffs. "Ah, but it is always the same," he murmured. "We lie to protect, we kill to preserve, and in the end, it is not the truth that destroys us, but the cost of hiding it." He turned from the window, his silhouette swallowed by the dark, and in the silence of Ravenstone, only the ticking clock remained. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Mirror Room. A silent witness, a secret room, a truth reflected in fear. The mirror cracked, a hairline fracture, sudden and violent, splitting the reflection of the corridor in two. Alice dropped the candlestick with a gasp, her eyes wide, her breath fogging the glass before her. For a moment, it looked as though her own image were bleeding, sliced down the center by some invisible blade. Behind her, the wind howled through the broken latch of the upstairs window. Somewhere deep in Ravenstone Manor, a door slammed with the finality of a tomb. And though she was alone, Alice swore she heard it, faint and breathless. A whisper, her name said like a secret, Alice. Poirot stood in the very same corridor mere minutes later, his eyes on the shattered mirror. He said nothing at first, simply adjusting his gloves as he stepped into the reflection's jagged aftermath. To the average eye, it was nothing more than a broken piece of antique glass. But Poirot, he saw the language of violence in its pattern, the sudden impact point near the lower left edge, just above waist level, the spiderweb lines reaching outward like the tendrils of a lie that had grown too large to conceal. Someone was standing here, Poirot murmured, and someone else did not want them to see. Alice trembled nearby, still clutching her apron, her voice a mere thread. I was only bringing linen, monsieur, and then, I don't know, it was as if someone was behind me. Poirot turned to her, his gaze gentle. Not a ghost, mademoiselle. Number, but perhaps something just as terrifying. The past. This part of the manor, the eastern wing, had been sealed for years. The doors, unused, the mirrors untouched, layered with dust, like forgotten time. Yet tonight, this room had awoken, and with it, something long buried. Poirot stood before the mirror again. He noticed now the frame, mahogany, but with ornate silver inlay shaped like vines. Near the bottom, two symbols etched so delicately they could be missed. The owl crest from the letters and a barely perceptible keyhole beneath it. His eyes narrowed. Later, in the privacy of his temporary study, he reviewed everything again. The mirror was not merely decorative. It was the entrance to something hidden. Not metaphorically, literally, a concealed room. Perhaps once used for observation. Perhaps for secrecy. But why conceal it? And more importantly, why activate it now? He returned to the corridor alone that evening. The candles flickered, casting distorted reflections in the fractured glass. Poirot reached forward, fingers brushing along the keyhole. There had to be a mechanism, something old, delicate, precise. He examined the vines, following the inlay, and then, click. The left panel of the mirror pushed inward. A door. He entered. Dust swallowed him like a fog. The smell was old paper and mold. A single room, barely larger than a wardrobe. But the walls, they were mirrors, all four sides, except one, the western side, which was actually a two-way glass pane. On the other side of it, the master bedroom, Lady Hargrave's chamber. Poirot's breath slowed. Someone had once used this room to watch her, and perhaps still had. He turned to the back wall where something had been disturbed. Recently, a set of old chairs, a cloth covering something underneath. Poirot bent down, lifting it. A camera, an old reel-to-reel model, dusty but with fresh smudges on the lens. And next to it, a box. He opened it. Inside, film reels, some labeled, most not. Poirot's fingers paused on one labeled with trembling ink. C.H. Final Night. He took it. Back in his study, Poirot waited until the others were asleep. He found an old projector in the Manor's storage room, restored it with George's help, and loaded the reel. He watched. Shadows flickered onto the wall. A bedroom. Soft candlelight. A man. Charles Hargrave. Pacing. Speaking to someone off-screen. The audio was faint, barely audible, but Poirot leaned. In it, you can't protect them all, Mercer. Hargrave's voice snapped. A blur crossed the frame. Mercer, possibly. Then another figure entered. Eveline, her face drawn, frightened. They'll know, she said. Hargrave shouted something indecipherable, then staggered, as though struck. Poirot froze the frame. Someone else was in the room, a fourth person, but they never stepped fully into view. Poirot leaned back. His mind was racing now. Someone had been watching. Someone had preserved this moment, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of control. They wanted evidence, insurance, and they were still here. He gathered the household the next morning. No accusations. Not yet. Instead, he asked a question. Who here knows of the mirror room? Dead silence. Then, Dr. Mercer stirred. An old servant's tale. Nothing more. Poirot watched him carefully. No, Doctor. Not a tale. A truth. And someone here used it. Recently. Eyes flicked across the room. No one spoke. Poirot waited. The silence suffocated them. At last, Celeste Vane rose from her seat. I knew of it, she said, her voice steady. I was shown it, years ago. By Charles Poirot, blinked. Ah, that explains much. And you used it? She nodded. Once, after his death. I thought maybe the truth was there, but all I found were shadows. Poirot studied her. Did you find the film reels? Celeste hesitated. Number what reels? A beat too long. Poirot turned to Bainbridge. And you, Colonel? You are a man of discipline. Surely you searched the manor when Charles died. I sealed that wing, Bainbridge admitted, on Lady Hargrave's request. She didn't want the past bleeding into the present. Or perhaps, Poirot said softly, she didn't want someone finding what she could not explain. Then he turned to the one person no one had expected him to suspect. Alice. You've worked here the longest, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. You clean, you observe. Did you ever listen? Alice looked panicked. I didn't. You did, Poirot said, his voice cutting now. You knew about the mirror room, and you said nothing. Tears welled in her eyes. I was told not to. Poirot approached her. By whom? She shook her head. He turned away. Now he saw it clearly. A room of mirrors, a house of secrets, a cast of performers, each acting their part. But the truth? It had always been watching from behind the glass. That night, Poirot watched the final reel. It revealed the missing piece, the fourth person, not fully visible, but enough. A reflection in one mirror caught them, distorted but unmistakable. Dr. Mercer, not an observer, an instigator. Poirot confronted him alone. You poisoned Charles, Poirot said calmly. Slowly, you made him believe he was losing his mind. Mercer paled. You have no proof. I have motive. The letters, the tapes, your fear, and your desire to control the narrative. He was dangerous. No, Poirot said, stepping closer. He was inconvenient. You sedated him the night he died. You watched from the mirror room, and when Vincent found the truth, you panicked. You tried to plant doubt. You told Alice what to say. Mercer collapsed into the chair, defeated. It was never supposed to go that far, he whispered. Charles was a tyrant, Evelyn was terrified. I thought I could help her. But you helped yourself, Poirot said, with control, with silence. Later, as the police led Mercer away, Poirot remained by the mirror. He looked into the fractured reflection of himself, split, multiplied. We think mirrors show us the truth, he murmured, but all they do is reflect what we wish to hide. He turned, his coat catching the candlelight one last time, and behind him, the mirror room sealed itself once more. Chapter 5. The Clue. Poirot refused to see. Even geniuses can miss the obvious, especially when it's hidden in plain sight. The candle tipped slowly, spilling wax like tears down the side of the writing desk. Poirot stared at the puddle congealing on the hardwood floor, untouched, unblinking, as if its slow expansion carried some profound answer. Behind him, the storm struck again, thunder rolling over Ravenstone like a growl from beneath the earth, and the old manor groaned in response. Poirot did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the wax, the trail, the edge, where it stopped, hardening into silence. Then he whispered to himself, not with triumph, but with quiet fury. "Non, I should have seen it." Hours earlier, Poirot had sat beneath the grand chandelier of the drawing-room, cross-legged and still, while the others attempted once again to convince themselves the worst had passed. Dr. Mercer had been taken away, yes, but the shadows had not lifted from Ravenstone. If anything, they had thickened, a murder exposed, and yet the sense of something wrong persisted. Poirot could feel it, like a tremor beneath calm waters, a name unspoken, a secret left to rot, and the clue, he knew it now, had been there from the beginning. He stood slowly, ignoring the glances. His body turned instinctively toward the east wing, toward the very hallway where the mirror had cracked, where the false alibi had misled him, where fear had walked with slippered feet. As he passed beneath the antique archway, a soft clicking sound caught his ear. The grandfather clock. Poirot turned his head, watching the pendulum swing with a solemn rhythm. And then he frowned. It struck him suddenly. The time. On the morning Vincent Hargrave was discovered dead, Alice had said she heard the clock chime 4 times. But this was not the main clock. This was a second, smaller, less ornate, and slightly off in its calibration. It always struck 2 minutes early. Poirot had noted it before, but dismissed it as irrelevant. Now he felt a chill wash through him. If Alice heard this clock chime, then the time she saw Vincent was not 4 o'clock. It was 3:58, nearly an hour before the time of death. She had been telling the truth, but the truth had been bent by assumption. Poirot spun on his heel and walked with purpose. In his own mind, he saw the case rearranging, figures shuffling like chess pieces on a cursed board. Mercer's guilt had been real, but incomplete. Vincent's death had not been a spontaneous panic. It had been planned, calculated, executed not by a man driven to madness, but by someone who had spent their life behind curtains, observing without being seen, someone who understood timing, someone who had trained all their life to be invisible. Poirot found Georges in the hall and asked him to bring Lady Hargrave, Bainbridge, Celeste, and, most importantly, Alice, to the library within the hour. Then he returned to the mirror room one final time. The secret door groaned open, with reluctant familiarity. Inside, the dust had been disturbed again. Poirot knelt, tracing faint impressions on the ground, a single footprint, smaller than his own, narrow, delicate, a woman's, and beside it a scrap of cloth snagged on the edge of the frame. Poirot took it gently. Silk, deep plum in color. He stepped back. He remembered the guest's attire from that cursed night. Only one person had worn a silk robe of that exact shade. Not Lady Hargrave, not Celeste, but the maid, Alice. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps it made too much sense. He returned to the library. They were already gathered, the fire low, the tension high. Alice stood near the door, withdrawn. Celeste sat near the window, head turned slightly, eyes unreadable. Bainbridge had assumed his usual position by the mantel, arms crossed, jaw tight. Lady Hargrave looked aged in days. Her once icy resolve melted to uncertainty. Poirot began softly. "Mes amis," he said, "we have uncovered so much. A false alibi. A hidden room. A murder orchestrated in silence. And yet something has remained elusive." He paced slowly. "There was a detail I missed, not because it was hidden, but because Hercule Poirot, chose to see it as irrelevant. A clock, 2 minutes fast." Alice looked up sharply. He turned to her. "You told the truth, mademoiselle. You saw Vincent at 4, you believed. But it was earlier. You were manipulated, but not by Mercer. Number by someone much closer to you. Someone you trusted." Alice stepped back. "I don't understand." "Non," Poirot said gently, "but you will." He turned now to Celeste. "Mademoiselle Vane," he said, "you have played many roles, but none so convincing as the grieving confidant." Her expression did not falter. "You returned to Ravenstone for a reason," Poirot continued. "Not to mourn Charles Hargrave, but to retrieve something. A letter, a recording. Proof that could ruin you." Celeste's voice was cool. "And what motive would I have to kill Vincent?" Poirot stopped, pacing. "You were not protecting yourself. You were protecting someone else. Someone who knew your secret. Someone who used it." Silence fell like a curtain. Poirot's gaze shifted. Lady Hargrave's face had gone ashen. Celeste's lips parted, just slightly, and Alice began to cry. Poirot walked to her. "Tell them, mademoiselle." She shook her head. I didn't want to. I didn't mean for anyone to die." Lady Hargrave whispered, "Alice, what have you done?" Poirot answered for her. "She did not act alone. Number Alice was merely the instrument, the hand. But the mind, that was yours, Lady Hargrave." The silence shattered like the mirror. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "You found out what Charles had done. To Celeste, to others. You couldn't bear the truth. So you buried it. And when Vincent discovered it, when he told Alice, you convinced her it was for the good of the family, that he would destroy everything." Tears ran down Alice's cheeks. She said he'd ruin us. She said he'd lie. Poirot's voice turned cold. "He told the truth." Lady Hargrave collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. "I never wanted it to happen like this." "You never wanted to face the consequences," Poirot replied. The others stood in stunned silence. Bainbridge looked at her, betrayed. Celeste looked at Alice, shattered. Poirot stepped back. "In the end, it was not poison or a push that killed Vincent Hargrave," he said. "It was the weight of a lie that lived behind the eyes of the only person he thought he could trust." He turned toward the door. As the police arrived, Poirot remained silent. Later that night, he walked once more through the eastern corridor. The candle had long since gone cold. The wax hardened into a perfect gleaming shape, round and smooth like a sealed truth. Poirot looked into the mirror again. The fracture still ran through the center, and this time he saw his own face reflected in two halves. He stared at himself. Even the great Hercule Poirot, he whispered, can overlook the truth when it hides in the hearts of the innocent. He turned away, and the candle flickered back to life behind him. Chapter 6. 3 suspects, 1 impossible truth. All have motives, all have alibis. One is lying. The knock came again, louder this time. 3 deliberate strikes that echoed through Ravenstone's long hallway like the tolling of a judge's gavel. Poirot did not rise at once. He simply looked at the door, his reflection caught in the window behind him, candlelight dancing at his back. The manor was silent now, too silent. The kind of silence that falls not from peace, but from dread, from the weight of truths too long hidden. Slowly, he stood and opened the door. On the other side stood Georges, face pale, voice thin. "Monsieur, another letter has arrived." Poirot took the envelope without speaking. His fingers already knew the texture, cream parchment, thick and smug, sealed with the same owl crest. He turned it over. There was no addressee, no warning, just a folded sheet inside. 4 words. "You've missed something vital." It was not a threat. It was a taunt. Poirot sat, his brow tightening. This now had become more than a case. It was a conversation between predator and prey, and he was not certain which he was. That morning, the storm broke. Rain gave way to a grey, merciless sky that seemed to strip Ravenstone of colour. The grounds were slick with mud, the trees motionless. Inside, however, tension swirled like mist. Poirot called for the drawing room to be cleared, save for 3 individuals. The final 3 he could not eliminate. 3 who remained, with pieces of the puzzle tangled around them like barbed wire. Celeste Vane, Colonel Bainbridge, and Dorian Selwyn, the Hargrave family lawyer. Each had motive, each had means, each had presented an alibi, and Poirot no longer believed any of them. Celeste stood by the window, her eyes rimmed with shadow, but not weakness. A woman who had lived in scandal and survived by becoming the performance. Her history with Charles Hargrave was no longer speculation. The letters revealed their affair. But the tone, they were not love letters. They were blackmail. Colonel Bainbridge sat with the rigidity of a soldier long out of war, but never truly returned. Loyal, methodical, driven by an old-world sense of protection. But there were inconsistencies. His movements during the night of Vincent's murder, the absence of a witness to confirm his sleep, and his relationship with Lady Hargrave, too close, too unquestioning. Then there was Selwyn. Dorian Selwyn, with his silver tie-pin and ever-placid demeanor, hands always folded, voice as smooth as ink. He had drafted the Hargrave estate documents. He stood to gain, should scandal unravel the will. And it had not escaped Poirot's notice that Selwyn was the first to suggest cremation, before Vincent's body had even cooled. Poirot stood before them now, expression unreadable. The fire crackled behind him. "Mes amis," he said softly, "we are nearing the end." But like all good finales, the truth hides behind contradiction. I have before me 3 people of intellect, of grace, of persuasion, each with a story. And one, just one, is a lie. Bainbridge scoffed. "This is becoming theatre." "Non," Poirot replied without looking at him. "Theatre has more honesty." He turned to Celeste. "You say you were asleep the night of the murder, but the hallway outside your room was damp. Footprints led toward the study. Small, precise. A woman's heel. Yours." Celeste's lips tightened. "I went for a walk. I was restless." "Restless? And carrying a letter opener?" Poirot asked gently. She blinked. Poirot held up the object. It had been found under a loose floorboard in the study, wiped clean, but not clean enough. A weapon, perhaps, Poirot continued, or a tool. Either way, it was yours. It bore your initials. CV. You tried to hide it, but why? Before she could speak, he turned to Bainbridge. And you, Colonel, you claim to have slept soundly, yet you were the only person whose room was locked from the outside. Why? Who locked it? Bainbridge hesitated. Evelyn. She feared someone might harm me. Poirot's voice dipped. Evelyn, who was already dead by then. A pause, a flicker of guilt in Bainbridge's eyes. You staged your own alibi, Poirot said. You wanted to appear vulnerable, but you were far from asleep. Finally, he turned to Selwyn. You have been very quiet, Poirot said. Because I've had very little to say, Selwyn replied, smiling politely. Then allow me to give you something, Poirot said. He removed a document from his coat, an unsigned version of the Hargrave will. The signature line left blank. This version lists you not only as executor, but beneficiary, should both Vincent and Evelyn be declared compromised. Selwyn did not flinch. That document is irrelevant. It was never signed. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, but you see, Monsieur Selwyn, the fire in the East Wing consumed many things. A fire started with paraffin oil and torn ledger paper. He stepped forward. One of those things was the real copy, the signed one. Now Selwyn paled. You have no proof. No? Poirot reached into his pocket once more. He withdrew a photograph, taken from a hidden camera in the mirror room before Mercer was arrested. In the frame, Selwyn, pouring oil onto a stack of documents. Selwyn sank slightly into his chair. Silence held the room in a choke. Poirot exhaled. We have a false alibi, a forged will, a hidden blade, and yet only one person orchestrated all three. He turned. To know who is guilty, we must understand this. Who benefits from the chaos? Celeste, who longed for silence. Bainbridge, who longed for order. Or Selwyn, who longed for profit. Poirot walked slowly to the hearth, then faced them once more. It was none of you alone. That is the impossible truth. They stared. Poirot continued. You worked together, not from conspiracy, but from fear. Each of you saw a part of the truth. Each of you acted, independently. Bainbridge covered for Evelyn, locking himself in. Celeste planted the letter opener, believing Vincent was threatening her past. Selwyn destroyed the will, fearing what Vincent's inheritance would reveal about his own dealings. Poirot paused. But only one of you killed Vincent. The room held its breath. Poirot stepped forward. Celeste Vane. She froze. You confronted Vincent. He threatened to expose you. You struck him, not with intent to kill, but he fell, hit the floor, and then you panicked. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. No, she said. I didn't mean to. He lunged at me. Poirot bowed his head. It was not murder in passion, but in fear. She collapsed into a chair. Poirot turned to the others. You did not kill him, but you lied, and in lying, you buried him. Later, when she was taken away, Poirot stood alone in the library. Georges approached. Is it over, monsieur? Poirot looked to the fire, eyes reflecting flame. No, Georges, it is never over, because for every truth we uncover, another hides behind it. But we do what we must. We reveal, we restore, even when it breaks us. He turned back to the window. Outside, the rain began again, and behind him, the clock struck once. Chapter 7. The girl who vanished twice. She disappeared years ago. Now she's back. Or is she? The candlelight flickered once, then died. In its place, the wind moved through the corridor like a whisper with breath, slow, deliberate, filled with presence. Poirot did not flinch. He stood in the east wing hallway, staring at the portrait that had been turned to face the wall. A girl, perhaps 16, in a blue dress with lace at the collar, painted eyes, green as storm glass. He had passed this portrait many times before without seeing it. That, he realized, had been the mistake. For the eyes that looked back from the canvas were not from a memory. They were from the present. Georges approached, his voice low. "Monsieur, she's arrived." Poirot nodded once. "Then it is time to meet the dead." He followed Georges to the drawing room, where the fire barely held its heat and the air hung heavy with tension. A woman stood before the hearth, back straight, posture poised, but something unnatural in her stillness. She wore gloves, though the room was warm, and her hat remained on her head, large-brimmed, shadowing her eyes. "Miss Eleanor Hargrave," Georges announced. She turned. Poirot took her in quietly. Yes, he thought, the resemblance is uncanny. The jaw, the brows. But something is missing. Years ago, Eleanor Hargrave, Charles and Evelyn's only child, vanished from a boarding school in Switzerland. Vanished without a trace. Rumors abounded. Kidnapping, suicide, escape. The body was never found. The family grieved in silence. The case closed in frustration. And now, here she stood, alive, or so it seemed. Poirot approached with a bow. "Mademoiselle, you must forgive me if I do not leap to embrace a miracle. I am not, as they say, unromantic, but I am, tragically, meticulous." She smiled faintly. "I understand. You are not here to believe. You are here to know." "Just so," Poirot replied. "Please, tell me, where have you been?" Her voice was calm. British accent, faint French influence, well measured. "I was taken from the school, kept in hiding by someone who feared my return. For years, I lived under another name in Belgium, and when I finally escaped, I came home." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, and how did you escape?" "A fire, in the country house I was kept. I fled in the confusion." He watched her carefully. "And no attempt was made to contact the authorities before now?" "I was afraid." Fear. It is a most compelling sedative." The others gathered slowly. Colonel Bainbridge entered first, then Dorian Selwyn, whose expression could have been carved from marble. Lady Hargrave's absence was expected, still under police scrutiny, held in seclusion after her part in Vincent's murder. Celeste Vane entered last. When she saw Eleanor, she stopped. The color drained from her face. Poirot saw it. That was the first fracture. After Eleanor was shown to her temporary room, Poirot turned to Celeste, privately. "You recognize her?" Celeste said, nothing for a long moment. Then, "She looks like Eleanor, but not like I remember. Her eyes were different, lighter. That woman's eyes are nearly hazel." Poirot nodded. "And memories, they are unreliable, yet instinct. It often is not." That evening, Poirot reviewed the boarding school records, which he had obtained years ago when consulting on Eleanor's disappearance. One detail returned to him now with peculiar urgency. Eleanor had been left-handed, a trait her tutors noted for its elegant handwriting. In the library, Poirot had observed the young woman write her name in the guest ledger. The pen had been held in her right. He returned to the hallway and stared at the portrait again. The artist had painted Eleanor seated at a desk, quill in hand. Left hand. Ah, Poirot whispered. But human nature, Hastings. It never changes. A lie never hides completely. It always leaves one finger exposed. The next morning, he confronted Selwyn in his study. You, monsieur, met Eleanor once. Before, correct? Selwyn looked up from his writing. Briefly, years ago. Then you understand why I ask. Have you found anything strange about her reappearance? Selwyn hesitated. She carries herself like a Hargrave, but her story, it's too neat, and she refuses to offer proof. No letters, no scars, no details beyond the general. Poirot nodded. And yet, the family fortune would now be hers. Selwyn's eyes darkened. Exactly. By midday, Poirot requested Eleanor join him in the garden for tea. The sky was grey, wind rustling through the hedgerows like dry whispers. He poured her tea himself. I must ask, he said casually, do you recall the gardener from your childhood, Mr. Ames? Eleanor hesitated. Of course, he had a bad leg, limped terribly. Poirot sipped his tea. Ah, then it is strange. The Ames I met this morning stands quite straight. Tall, in fact. She blinked once. Perhaps I'm mistaken. Perhaps, Poirot echoed. Memory is a strange thing. He stood slowly. Would you join me in the East Wing? There is something you must see. He led her through the hallways, past the rooms of grief, to the mirror. The cracked glass now gleamed in morning light. This room, Poirot said, has revealed many truths, and one more waits. He opened the hidden door. She paused. No curiosity, he asked. I'm just tired. Yes, Poirot said softly. Tired of the charade. He turned to face her fully now. You are not Eleanor Hargrave. You are her cousin, adopted as an orphan by Charles's estranged brother. You lived in Lyon for many years. When the real Eleanor vanished, you came into contact with someone who realized the fortune could be yours, if the lie was good enough. She said nothing. Poirot continued. You were trained, your accent softened, your posture refined. You studied the family, the portrait. You practiced left-handed writing, but it never took. She remained silent. Poirot stepped closer. But then, he said, you made a mistake. Several. You described a gardener who limped. But Ames was hired after Eleanor disappeared. You held the pen in your right hand. You hesitated when asked about your own childhood dog. Finally, she spoke. None of that proves anything. No, Poirot agreed. But this does. He withdrew a locket, one he had taken from the safe, in Lady Hargrave's room. Inside was a picture of the real Eleanor, age 9, and a lock of her hair. He had sent it for forensic comparison that morning. The results arrived, Poirot said. You are not a match. Her facade cracked then, the eyes, so careful, hardened. You cannot arrest me, she said. There's no crime in pretending. No, Poirot said. But there is one in fraud, in deception, and in orchestrating the chaos of this house. She turned to leave, but Selwyn was already in the doorway. You used me, he said, to rework the will, to build your story. She stared at him. You agreed to help. I agreed to help Eleanor, not you. Poirot stepped forward. This manor has been bled by liars. You may be the final wound. She was taken quietly. Later, Poirot stood again before the mirror. The portrait of Eleanor had been restored. He looked at it long, and then said aloud, she did vanish twice, once in body and once in name. He walked away, his voice carrying with him into the darkening hall. It is not death that haunts us, Hastings. It is forgetting who the dead truly were. Chapter 8. A lie, wrapped in red silk. A single item exposes a lifetime of deception. The scrap of silk was no larger than a handkerchief, and yet it brought the room to its knees. Poirot stared at it, red, vivid as blood, curled like a ribbon at the edge of the fireplace, where no one had noticed it before. The flames flickered behind it, licking at the shadows like they wanted to consume the evidence before it could speak. But Poirot had seen it, and now the lie, elegant and cruel, was unraveling before his eyes. He reached down, pinching the corner between two fingers as delicately as one might lift a poison vial. It was smooth, expensive, perfumed, not old. No, recently used, recently dropped, and unmistakably familiar. He did not speak as he turned it over. No words needed. The stitching, though partially scorched, was still intact. A single initial remained, embroidered in silver thread. And H. Poirot's gaze hardened, his breath even. This was not merely fabric, it was a confession. For days now, Ravenstone had held its breath in the aftermath of Eleanor's unmasking. The impostor had been exposed, the estate's legal battle ignited, and what remained of the Hargrave name trembled on the edge of collapse. But still, Poirot had felt it. A tension that refused to resolve. The sense that something essential had slipped through his grasp. A thread left untouched. A truth unspoken. And now, here it was, nestled beneath ash and ember, like a serpent in velvet. Poirot turned from the fire and walked back to the east corridor. The manor seemed darker than before, not from shadow, but from revelation. The walls no longer whispered, they watched. As he passed the portraits, he caught his own reflection in the glass, not as he was, but as he had once feared to become, fallible, blind to the final stroke. Ah, but no, not this time. He entered the study and laid the silk square atop his desk. From the drawer, he removed his notes, his sketches, the copied correspondences that formed the lattice of the Hargrave family's long-dead truths. One letter in particular caught his attention. Dated April 2nd, 1917. Written by Charles Hargrave to a mysterious woman he referred to only as L. The contents were cryptic, but the tone desperate. There was mention of a promise, of a child, of a scandal too dangerous to surface. Tell no one, the letter ended. Not even her, especially not her. Poirot had once assumed L referred to Celeste Vane, the actress and former companion of Charles. But now, with the silk in hand, the scent fresh and expensive, and the initial H gleaming faintly in the light, he realized his error. It had never been L. It had been H, for Hargrave, Lady Evelyn. But why would Charles hide something from his own wife? And more importantly, why had this silk, hers by design, ended up in the ashes beside the fireplace where the original will had been destroyed? Poirot's fingers tapped the desk. Georges entered a moment later with a letter. This arrived, monsieur. No sender. Poirot took it, already suspecting what it would contain. Inside, a torn photograph. A woman with a child. The same red silk wrapped around the child's wrist as a makeshift bracelet. And written on the back, a single line in Charles Hargrave's hand. She must never know. Poirot closed his eyes. The child. Not Eleanor. Someone else. He stood at once and summoned the remaining guests. Bainbridge, Selwyn, Celeste, Alice. They gathered in the salon, to the wee room lit only by firelight, and the sound of the rain beginning again against the stained glass windows. Poirot stood before them, hands folded, calm. I will not speak in riddles, he began. I have found what was meant to remain hidden, a fragment of silk, an emblem, a memory. He lifted the red square for all to see. This belonged to Lady Evelyn Hargrave. There was a murmur. Poirot let it fade. And this silk, he continued, was used to wrap a secret, a child. Born not to her, but to Charles, illegitimately, hidden, raised in secrecy, supported in silence, and it is this child, now grown, who has walked among us. Eyes widened. He turned now to Alice. She shrank slightly in her seat, but not from guilt, from something else. You were taken in by the Hargraves as a servant, Poirot said, but you were never just a maid. You were a quiet arrangement, a secret inheritance, and Charles ensured your silence with protection. Alice shook her head. I never knew who I was, only that I was told to stay, to obey. I didn't know. But you did, Poirot said softly. You found the letters, the silk, and you feared what it meant. You didn't want to destroy this house. You wanted to belong to it. Tears ran down her face. She hated me. Lady Evelyn, she treated me like dirt. And I never understood why. She knew, Poirot whispered. She always knew. And she hated that Charles had loved another enough to leave behind a child. He turned now to the others. And here is where the lie blooms fully. Evelyn, desperate to bury the past, fed that resentment until it poisoned every corner of this house. She convinced Alice that silence was safety, that obedience was gratitude. And when Vincent discovered the truth, Evelyn panicked. He held up the silk again. This was found beneath the fireplace, where the will was destroyed. It was wrapped around the original copy, proof that Charles had left something to his secret child, to Alice. Now even Bainbridge could not speak. Selwyn, Poirot said, you saw the will. You knew. You chose not to act. I was sworn to secrecy, Selwyn murmured. By Evelyn. And Celeste, Poirot continued, you recognized the silk. You once saw Charles give it to someone else. You lied to protect your own memory of him, not the truth. Poirot stepped back. And Alice, poor Alice. You were never meant to vanish, but they made you invisible. He walked to the fire and dropped the silk in, watching it curl and blacken in the flame. So, now we burn the lie, he said softly, and leave only the truth. There was silence, not relief, not peace, just the heavy, echoing stillness of something long buried finally surfacing. Later, Poirot stood alone in the corridor. The portrait of Lady Evelyn now seemed different. He stared at it in the candlelight, watching the painted eyes that had once held pride now reflect shame. Georges approached. You were right, monsieur. Poirot nodded. I usually am, but sometimes, Georges, I wish I were not. He turned from the painting, walking down the hallway toward the darkness that waited, and as he passed the mirror, he saw not himself, but a child's face, ghost-like, soft, eyes wide with longing. And then it was gone. A lie, Poirot murmured, no matter how delicate, is still a weapon, and the sharpest ones are always dressed in silk. Chapter 9. The Inspector's Fatal Mistake. A trusted ally makes a deadly error. Poirot is left reeling. The revolver was still warm. Its barrel quivered in the trembling hand of Inspector Alden Graves, smoke curling from the tip like a whisper rising to heaven. The silence that followed the shot was not empty. It was stunned, solid. A silence that wrapped itself around everyone in the room like a noose. The body slumped against the doorway, blood blooming across the white of the shirt. Poirot did not move. His mind raced. but his feet remained still. He stared at the scene as if it had arrived from a nightmare he had been trying not to have. The wrong man was dead. You said he was the one," Graves stammered. "You looked at me and nodded, Poirot. You nodded." "I nodded," Poirot said softly, "because I had just seen the truth, and you had not waited for it." The body at their feet, Jonathan Lyle, the estate's recently returned groundskeeper, summoned to Ravenstone by the legal proceedings surrounding the Hargrave fortune, a man of simple demeanor, quiet history, unremarkable speech, but now he was dead, shot in the chest by a lawman whose instinct had failed him at the most crucial hour. Poirot stepped forward and knelt beside the body. The expression frozen on Lyle's face was not one of malice. It was confusion, fear, perhaps, surprise, but not guilt. No weapon was found on him, only a letter, half-folded in his pocket. Poirot retrieved it with deliberate care. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, dated 2 days prior. He read the first line and stopped. His heart did not race, but a cold unease filled the space behind his ribs. The letter was from Alice. "Mr. Lyle, I have discovered something terrible. I fear you were right about the ledger. I found it hidden behind the paneling in the east wing. Please meet me there at dawn. Come alone." Poirot read the words again, slowly. "Non, non, non, non," he murmured, standing. "This was not a trap set for you, Inspector Graves. It was set for him." Graves looked as though he might collapse. "But the ledger, we didn't find it. We assumed he took it." "That assumption," Poirot interrupted, "was your mistake, and it cost a man his life." The others in the room, Selwyn, Celeste, Bainbridge, stood frozen. No one spoke. The death had been too fast, too clean, and too wrong. Poirot turned sharply, leaving the room and the smell of gunpowder behind. His steps echoed through the corridor, crisp and exact. He did not shake, but inside, something shifted. A wrong death never left a man, especially when it could have been prevented. He entered the study and closed the door behind him. Candlelight flickered across the room's mahogany surfaces. The fire burned low. He moved to the bookshelf and reached behind the 4th volume of Les Miserables, where the back panel had recently shown signs of tampering. It gave way with a soft click. Inside, a ledge. And on that ledge, exactly as the letter had said, a leather-bound ledger, its pages stained with water and time. Poirot brought it into the light. Page after page of financial records, names, transactions, some familiar, some coded. But what stood out, what twisted the knife already buried, was that Lyle's name was not on a single line, but Graves's was, twice. Poirot turned back to the page. One transaction, a payment from Charles Hargrave, nearly 12 years ago. Large, discreet, not to Lyle, not to Mercer, but to A.G., marked under the pretense of legal confidentiality. Poirot whispered aloud, "Ah, mon Dieu." He stood, walked to the mantel, and looked into the mirror above it. The man who looked back was composed, but only just. To err, he thought, is to be human. But to err with a pistol in hand is to rewrite justice. He called for Graves to join him. The inspector entered like a ghost, face pale, lips bloodless. "You wish to prove yourself useful," Poirot said quietly, "but in doing so, you rendered yourself culpable." Graves said nothing. Poirot placed the ledger on the desk. "This is your signature," Poirot said. "Twice. The first payment years ago was to falsify a report in the disappearance of a young woman connected to Charles Hargrave. The second, more recent, was to suppress a police inquiry into the inheritance fraud. Graves stepped back, as though struck. "I was told it was harmless," he said. "A favor, nothing more." "There is no such thing," Poirot replied. "Not in this house." Poirot studied him a long time, then said, "You were not evil, Graves, but you were weak. And weakness, when given a badge and a bullet, becomes something far more dangerous." The inspector fell into the nearest chair. Poirot left him there. Outside the manor, the sky had begun to darken. It was not yet evening, but the clouds gathered with an urgency that made the day feel like it was closing early. Poirot walked the gardens slowly, reflecting on what had happened. The mistake had not been born from greed or jealousy or hatred. It had come from the desire to be decisive, to act. But in Ravenstone, every action had weight. Every assumption carried a price. As he passed the rose archway, Alice stepped from the hedgerow, face pale. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked. "The ledger?" "Yes," Poirot said. "And now Jonathan's dead." "Yes." Tears filled her eyes. "He was trying to help. He told me about the accounts, about the hush money. He said Charles had been paying off people for years. Women, children, servants." Poirot nodded slowly. "He was right, and he died for it." Alice turned away. "I trusted Graves. I thought he would protect me." Poirot replied, "Trust, mademoiselle, is not a gift to give without caution, even to the uniformed." Back inside, he summoned Bainbridge, Selwyn, and Celeste. The ledger was placed on the desk, open for all to see. "No more secrets," Poirot said. "Charles Hargrave did more than betray his family. He bought their silence, and those who took his money became complicit. Selwyn, you accepted 2 payments to bury inquiries. Bainbridge, you turned a blind eye when Mercer reported a missing girl who had served here briefly." Bainbridge tensed. "I didn't know." "But you suspected," Poirot said. "And that is the fatal sin of this house. Everyone suspected, and no one acted." He turned to Celeste. "You," he said, "were not paid. But you were used, and you let yourself be used again by the impostor who claimed to be Eleanor." She looked down. Poirot's voice was quiet. "This house has been a cathedral to silence, to secrets dressed as decorum. But now the walls must speak." Later that evening, Poirot sat alone in the study. The fire was nearly out. Georges entered with tea, but Poirot waved him away. He sat, unmoving, hands clasped in his lap, eyes lost in the flames. He whispered, "A mistake, Hastings, not of deduction, but of timing. We saw the truth only moments too late, and in that moment, the innocent died." He closed his eyes. "Let them call it justice. Let them say the right man was blamed. But I will know." The wind howled against the windows, and the fire shrank to embers. Poirot remained in the chair long after midnight, and in the darkness, he mourned the man he hadn't saved. Chapter 10. When Poirot lost control. He's always composed. Until now. What could break his legendary calm? The scream was not loud. It was short, stifled, and final. The kind of sound a person makes when the body is overwhelmed by something it cannot name. Poirot heard it from the south hallway. He was already rising before the silence could settle, the teacup left spinning in its saucer on the table behind him. He moved quickly, his footsteps firm against the creaking floorboards, candlelight flaring briefly in the sconces as he passed. The door was already open. Georges stood there, wide-eyed, blocking the frame with trembling hands. Poirot moved past him without asking, and stopped. On the floor Blood pooled beneath the folds of a heavy brocade curtain. A shoe protruded, slender, female, just visible enough for the truth to register before the mind had prepared for it. Poirot crossed the room and pulled the curtain back. Celeste. Her throat was cut, her eyes open, her lips parted as if in the middle of an unfinished line. One hand clutched at the hem of her gown as though she had tried to speak with her body what her mouth could not. He did not cry out. He did not gasp. He simply stared. The silence was his reaction, but his stillness was not calm. It was something darker, something tightly wound, slowly cracking. Georges whispered, "Monsieur, I did not see anyone. I came to deliver her note, as you asked. She said she wished to speak with you privately. About—" Poirot raised one hand. It trembled, just slightly. He turned away from the body. The room seemed to bend around him. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution. Celeste had known something. She had been on the edge of revealing it, and someone had made sure she never would. Poirot walked out of the room in silence, but this time his footsteps were uneven, less measured. His mind was not racing. It was burning. In the drawing room, the others waited. Selwyn, Bainbridge, Alice, and Graves, though the inspector now sat like a shadow, guilt still stitched into the curve of his spine from his fatal mistake. Poirot entered without ceremony. He did not sit. "There has been another murder," he said. Gasps. Bainbridge rose. Selwyn's hand went to his mouth. Alice began to cry. "Celeste," Poirot said. "Her throat was slit moments before I arrived. Whoever did this knew she had written to me, knew she was about to confess, and chose to silence her permanently." He stepped forward, eyes scanning the group. "But this is not like the others. This is not confusion or fear. This was cold, planned, efficient." He paused. "And I have had enough." His voice cracked, not in pitch, but in control. The measured calm that always held Poirot apart from the chaos of murder and lies was gone. What remained was the man underneath, the one who bore every death like a wound stitched beneath a waistcoat. "You have lied to me," he said, eyes narrowing on each of them. "Every one of you, in large ways and small. You have let me chase shadows while you buried the bodies in silence." He looked at Graves. "You shot an innocent man because you could not wait." To Bainbridge, "You kept Lady Hargrave's secrets long after they poisoned this house." To Selwyn, "You forged silence with contracts and revisions. You tried to hide the will that would have changed everything." To Alice, "You knew who your mother was. You knew the truth. And still, you played the role of the broken girl while orchestrating your own inheritance behind our backs." Alice gasped. "No, Poirot raised his voice, cutting her off. "You stood beside me as I uncovered betrayal after betrayal. You let me protect you, believe you, and you watched as others paid for what you already knew." His hands were trembling now, fists curled tightly, his breath uneven. And then he stopped, closed his eyes. When he spoke again, it was quieter, but the calm had not returned. Only sorrow. "I pride myself on observation, on order, on the little grey cells that make sense of the chaos. But here, in this house, every sense has failed me, not because the clues were absent, but because I chose to believe. That was my fatal mistake." He sat down at last, shoulders bowed, not in defeat, but in fury, restrained by exhaustion. The silence returned, but not the safety. Poirot turned to Georges, who stood pale in the doorway. Send for the constables. No one leaves, no one. And then he rose again and walked out of the room, alone. In the hallway, the lights seemed dimmer, the candles lower. He returned to the study and locked the door behind him. He sat at the desk and stared at the map he had drawn on the wall, lines of thread connecting the deaths, the secrets, the alliances. Vincent, Evelyn, Mercer, the imposter, Lyle, and now Celeste. Each had died for knowing too much, or for being someone's liability. But who was the spider, and why did Celeste have to die now? He opened her letter, half finished, the ink still wet when it was folded. Monsieur Poirot, there is something I saw years ago that I've never been able to explain. On the night Eleanor vanished, I saw someone outside the manor, not a stranger, someone from inside, watching, waiting. I didn't tell anyone because it ended there. No name, but enough. Outside the study, footsteps creaked in the hallway. Poirot moved to the door. He opened it silently and stepped into the corridor. And then he heard it. A voice. Low, urgent, whispering behind the wall. He followed the sound. To the mirror room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Bainbridge stood, staring through the glass at the empty master bedroom. He didn't turn. I never meant for any of this, he said. Poirot stepped in slowly. She trusted me, Eveline, and I protected her. But I never thought it would escalate. Poirot said nothing. Bainbridge turned, his face sunken. I didn't kill Celeste, but I knew it was coming. She told me she had written to you. She asked me to stand with her. He looked down. I couldn't. Poirot watched him for a long time. You let fear rule you, he said, as they all have. Bainbridge nodded once. Yes. And then Poirot asked softly, who was outside the night Eleanor vanished? Bainbridge's mouth opened, closed. Then, Selwyn. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Selwyn was there before the police, before the call went out. I saw his car. I thought perhaps he had come to speak with Charles. But later, I realized he had no reason to be there. Not that night. Poirot turned, already walking. The door to Selwyn's room opened with a click. Inside, empty. But on the desk, documents, folded neatly, and beneath them, a knife, its blade still stained. Poirot stared at it, then turned to Georges, now breathless behind him. Find him. Poirot's voice was low, but do not let him speak first. Later that night, Poirot sat alone in the library. The storm returned at last, rain lashing against the windows. He sat before the fire and whispered aloud, I did not lose control because I was wrong. I lost control because I was right too late. He closed his eyes, and a woman died for it. Chapter 11. The secret buried in the portrait. Behind the eyes of a painting lies the key to everything. The thunder cracked just as the frame split. A jagged noise of tearing canvas and snapping wood rang out through the grand hall, as if the painting itself had screamed. Poirot stepped back, staring up at the remnants of the portrait that had once hung above the fireplace, a portrait he had walked past 100 times without truly seeing. Charles Hargrave, depicted at the height of his power, standing with one hand resting on the mantel and the other in his pocket, his gaze distant, proud, almost smug. But now the oil had torn through the chest and the eyes, revealing more than age or artistry ever could. Behind it, within the hollowed cavity of the wall, something thin and metal clinked to the floor. Poirot bent to retrieve it, a brass key, small, cold, untouched by time, and with it a folded sheet of parchment, brittle at the edges, with a wax seal long cracked. Georges watched from the doorway, speechless. Poirot did not yet speak. The fire crackled below the shattered frame. A single strip of canvas flapped gently against the hearth, curling in the heat. Slowly, Poirot turned the parchment over and read the inscription across the seal, for her eyes only. He exhaled, low and slow. "Ah, Charles, you clever, cowardly man." The letter was not long, but it was enough. "If I am gone, and this is found, then the house is no longer mine. The truth must be known. The child is not dead. I paid to make her disappear. For her safety. For mine. If Evelyn ever knew, she would destroy her. I chose power over blood. I chose silence over confession. This portrait sees all, and behind its eyes I buried what I could not say aloud." Poirot reread the last sentence. Behind its eyes. He lifted the broken painting and examined the back. Inside the thick wooden frame was a second compartment, near where the canvas had split. A small wooden panel, cleverly hidden beneath layers of blackened varnish. It slid away with a soft click. Inside it, an envelope, yellowed with age. Poirot removed it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Evelyn. "You think I don't know, but I do. I've always known. You stole her from me. Not from the woman you had the affair with, no, from me. Because I would have raised her as our own. Because I would have forgiven you. But you let the world believe she was dead, and me a monster. And so I've done what I had to do. There are things hidden in this house that even you have not found. If I am to die with a lie, let it be of your making." Poirot folded the letter carefully. So Evelyn had known, not only of the child, but of Charles's deception. And she had not merely suffered silently, she had built her own fortress of lies. That was why the house had been filled with shadows, not from murder alone, but from the rot of guilt, grown layer by layer through generations. Poirot turned from the portrait and left the hall, without a word. In the drawing-room, Selwyn and Bainbridge sat in stiff silence. Graves stood by the window, arms folded, his shame still a fog he could not walk through. Alice paced by the hearth. Her eyes met Poirot's the moment he entered. Something in her expression changed. "You found something," she said. "Yes," Poirot answered quietly. "The truth." He placed the two letters on the table. Everyone leaned in. No one dared reach for them. "This," Poirot said, "is the final piece of the puzzle, the first lie that birthed the rest, the secret that buried a child alive in anonymity, destroyed marriages, triggered blackmail, and incited murder." He pointed to the seal on Charles's letter. This was hidden inside his portrait. A man so vain, so sure of his legacy, he believed the last word would be his. And in some ways, it is. Bainbridge leaned forward, reading quickly, then sat back, stunned. He lied to her, to everyone. Poirot nodded. Charles Hargrave fathered a child outside of marriage. Not the one we thought, no, not Alice. Alice was the diversion, a convenient, innocent pawn. The real daughter was Eleanor. The room gasped. Poirot raised a hand. But not the girl who vanished. He turned slowly to Alice. "You, mademoiselle, are Eleanor Hargrave." Alice stared at him. "What? You were never the maid. You were placed in the house, under that guise, when you were a child, after Charles staged your abduction. The Hargraves kept you under their roof, trained you, silenced you, stripped your name. They convinced you to become a servant to your own legacy. And they kept the lie alive, because the truth would have shattered their social empire. Poirot walked closer to her. She stumbled back slightly, her eyes wide. "You have always felt it, no? The strange way Lady Evelyn looked at you. Not hate, not love. Guilt, control, a sadness she would never speak aloud." He paused. "She tried to raise you in secret, out of fear of scandal. But when Charles forbade it, she could only keep you close by degrading you. That was her revenge." Tears slid down Alice's face now. Poirot turned to the others. The impostor who claimed to be Eleanor was part of a plan to seize the inheritance. Selwyn helped forge the documents. Bainbridge turned away as he has done before. And Celeste? She knew. She saw the child once, long ago, being led through the manor in silence. That's why she wrote to me. Poirot's voice grew tight. That is why she died. Selwyn stood. You have no proof. I have the portrait. I have the letters. I have the ledger entries that show you received payments from Charles. And I have the original birth certificate you tried to burn in the study's fireplace. Selwyn froze. Poirot nodded. I found the corner of it among the ashes, enough to show the name Eleanor Evelyn Hargrave, and the handwriting that matched yours, Monsieur Selwyn, where it was labelled for reclassification. The silence that followed was absolute. Poirot turned to Graves. Take him. As Selwyn was escorted out, Bainbridge sat in stunned silence, mouthing words to himself. Poirot approached Alice again. She looked small, collapsed within herself, as though her life had just been rewritten without her consent. I did not want it, she whispered. Any of it. I only wanted to belong. Poirot touched her shoulder gently. You did. You always did. It was they who refused to see. Later that night, Poirot returned to the gallery where the portrait had hung. The wall was bare now, empty, but not clean. The ashes had not been fully swept away. They remained in the corners, tucked between the floorboards. He stood in silence, alone with the ghosts. Georges appeared with a cup of tea. Poirot did not take it. He simply said, Do you know, Georges, the truth is like oil. It always rises. But sometimes the fire comes first. He turned and walked from the room, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps and a wall that no longer watched. Chapter 12. The twist that broke Poirot's code. The final reveal changes everything Poirot believed, including himself. The envelope had no seal, no name, no return address, and yet it sat upon Poirot's pillow like a death sentence dressed in cream parchment. He had just returned from the gallery, the hall still echoing with the sound of Selwyn's arrest, of Bainbridge's silence and Alice's tears. Ravenstone had begun to empty itself finally, but something remained. An unfinished chord in a symphony that had played too long. Poirot stared at the envelope, unmoving. The air in the room was heavy, as if someone had just left it, or had never truly left. He picked it up and opened it with the calm of a man long prepared for the worst. Inside was a single sheet. You solved the wrong crime, monsieur. The one who killed Vincent was never Selwyn. Poirot sat down. He read it again. The handwriting was familiar, but disguised. A left-handed script written with the right, a common trick. He had seen it once before. In the guest ledger, the air around him contracted. His fingers tightened over the edge of the note. A trap, or a truth. At this point, was there any difference? He stood and moved without coat or cane, walking through the darkened corridor of Ravenstone as the wind hissed beyond the leaded windows. The storm outside had returned, not dramatic, but persistent, like a whisper repeating the same word over and over. He passed the mirror where he once saw only his reflection, and now only saw the man behind it, the man who had been sure, who had known. He entered the library and found Alice by the fire, her hair unpinned, her face cast in shadow. She didn't turn to look at him. "You found the letter?" she said. Poirot stood still. "Yes." Her voice was calm. "Then you know." "I know," he replied, "but I do not yet understand." She looked at him then, slowly. Her eyes did not plead. They did not flinch. "I killed him," she said. "Vincent." "It was me." Poirot said nothing. "I didn't mean to, not at first, but then I did." He stepped forward, his breath catching in the silence. "Why?" "Because he knew," she said. "He figured it out, that I was Eleanor, that Charles had stolen me, that Lady Evelyn had turned me into a maid to erase me, and he said he would go public." She stood now, her hands at her sides. "He wasn't cruel. He thought he was helping. But I didn't want his help. I didn't want to be the heiress. I didn't want the world to know, because then I would become her, the missing girl, not me, not Alice, not the only person I'd ever been allowed to be." Poirot's jaw tightened. "So you silenced him?" "I gave him something," she said. "He thought it was a sedative, just to calm him. He said he was going to confront Bainbridge that night. I begged him not to. He insisted. So I gave him the drink." She looked down. "He never woke up." Poirot closed his eyes. "And the body at the cliff?" She smiled faintly. "He was never there. I moved him. I had hours before anyone found out. You remember? The mud didn't match." Yes, he had noticed that, and dismissed it. Poirot walked to the hearth, placing the letter on the mantel. "I have always believed in order," he said, "in truth, in reason, that even the darkest murder could be unraveled with patience and clarity, that the world, however cruel, could still be solved." She said nothing. "And now," Poirot said, his voice lowering, "I find the solution I sought is a confession I cannot bear." Alice stepped closer. "I didn't do it out of malice or greed. I did it to stay free, because once they knew who I was, I would be nothing but their legacy, their shame, their scandal in a silk dress." He turned to her, and for the first time, his voice cracked, not from rage, but from grief. "You were the victim," he said. "You were the secret child, the silenced heir, the forgotten daughter, and you became the criminal." She met his gaze. "And what does that make you, monsieur?" she asked. "The man who missed it all?" He said nothing, and in that silence, everything within him fractured. He had built his life upon the belief that evil was a flaw in logic, that if one could see enough, think enough, wait enough, evil could be caught, contained, named. But now, he had been part of the injustice. Unknowingly, but fatally, he had protected her, believed her, not because the clues said so, but because something in him wanted her to be innocent. That was the final betrayal, not hers, his. Poirot walked to the desk and opened the drawer. He took out a small recording device, one he had used only once before, when Mercer had confessed in the mirror room. He placed it on the table and pressed record. "Alice Hargrave," he said, "I am obligated to report this. I am bound by duty." She nodded. "I know. But I will ask you," he said, "one final question." She waited. He stepped closer. "When you took the name Eleanor from the ashes, when you let me chase lies through the corridors of this house, was it all a manipulation?" Her eyes shimmered with tears, but no sorrow. "Not at first," she said. "At first, I just wanted you to see me. And then, I realized you never would." Poirot stepped back. He stopped the recording and smashed the device against the stone hearth. Alice gasped. Poirot turned to her, his face unreadable, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "I will carry this truth," he said, "alone." She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. "Go." She blinked. "What?" "You may leave. Tonight. The last train departs at dawn. You will never return to this place, and if you are found again, I will not hesitate." She didn't move. "You will disappear," he said, "as you were once forced to, but this time, by choice." And then he turned from her, walked to the window, and stared out into the rain. She left. She did not say goodbye. And Poirot did not watch her go. Hours passed. Dawn arrived. Georges entered the room with his usual soft step. Poirot stood still at the window, hands behind his back. "Shall I prepare your bag, monsieur?" Georges asked. Poirot answered without turning. "Number Ravenstone is not done with me yet." And then, barely above a whisper, he added, "For the first time, Georges, I have solved the mystery, and I do not feel peace. I feel shame." The clock in the hall struck once, and Hercule Poirot, master of order, stood in the ruins of a truth he could not speak.